Thank you. And welcome, everybody. I'm Starhawk, and I want to just give a shout out to Dionysus, who's our wonderful interpreter for tonight, and to Charles Williams, who's doing our tech and who's my co-teacher in Earth Activist Training and does so much of the behind the scenes work that makes our world go. And a shout out to all of you. We've had a tremendous response to this offering tonight. And personally, that makes me feel hopeful and optimistic that there is so much interest in building regenerative movements. So we're going to dive right in. And I want to start by saying that I'm speaking to you from the traditional territories of the Ramaytush Ohlone, a beautiful place called Yelamu, or otherwise known as San Francisco, a place like so many places that carries this heritage of both stolen land and stolen peoples and stolen labor, of oppression and of suffering, but also a tremendous heritage of art and culture, of people who for tens of thousands of years tended this land very, very elegantly, did it with song and with story and with ceremony and with creativity. And we kind of now are here. I think part of our challenge in building regenerative movements, at least here in the United States, is always coming to terms with this strange dichotomy of loving the land that we're on and yet never feeling it's totally ours or that we totally have the right to claim connection to it. So I just want to say that I honor the traditional peoples of the land and that I hope that the work that we do can help us take up some of that role, some of that work of caring for and tending for land and for community. And I encourage you all, if you would like to put into the chat the traditional peoples of the land that you're on and the place that you're on. We always like to start our programs with a little bit of grounding, connecting to the earth. So maybe just take a moment, get yourself comfortable, wiggle around a little bit. It's beautiful to look at the chat and see all these beautiful names coming, and to just take a moment and give honor to all of those people, all of those amazing cultures, all of those languages, that incredible knowledge. And let's acknowledge that these are people that have not disappeared. Many of them are still here. And part of our movement often has been in recent years the land back process of helping to restore some of those original lands back to the people and their descendants, whose lands originally they were. And take a breath and feel your own connection to the land. I like to imagine I'm a tree with roots that go down into the earth. And feeling them push down through the floor, down through layers of soil and mud and rock, down through the bedrock, down through the waters that are held in the earth, all the way down to that core of fire at the very heart of the earth. And taking a deep breath, feeling that fire as the earth's living, creative energy, just taking a breath and drawing some of that up. up through all those layers of rock and mud and water and gravel and soil, up into your own feet and legs, up into the base of your spine, into your belly, up your spine into your heart. Just take a moment and just feel what's going on in your heart today. Up through your neck and throat and out the top of your head like branches that reach up to the sky and sweep back down, touch the earth. Feel that energy kind of coming up like a fountain, like a circle of energy. And then feel some of that sky energy. Where I am, sun's still out there. It's still daylight. There's sunshine. Where you are, it might already be moonlight or starlight. But just take a breath and draw that in. Breathe it down through the top of your head, down through your leaves and branches, down through your spine, down through your roots, down into the earth. So you feel earth and sky meet in you. As you breathe in and breathe out, you can imagine all of our roots connecting. In a forest, roots are connected by threads of mycorrhizal fungi. We can imagine our roots connected by energetic threads that weave this magical web that kind of connects through this electronic web. And our circle is cast. And into our circle, we always like to honor the elements that sustain our lives. So thinking about the movements and the desire, I think that so many of us feel for change and for justice. Taking a breath and just breathing in and out. And breath and air are often connected with thought and ideas. So thinking about the great ideas, the sets of values, the concepts that have motivated us down throughout history to work for justice, to work for resilience, and honoring air. And then thinking about fire, about passion and courage, about anger, honoring our anger, because our anger is often a response to injustice, to things that aren't right. But knowing that anger is like fire, it can burn you out, or it can warm your hearth. It can be destructive or it can be cleansing and constructive. So taking a breath and honoring fire. And thinking about water. Elders always say water is sacred, water is life. And water is like emotion, our feelings. Our love, our passion, our grief, our tremendous sorrow at the things that we are losing, our huge, huge love for our communities, for our loved ones, for the natural world. Welcoming that great power of water. Thank you, water. And earth, this material world beneath our feet. All these things that actually sustain and nurture our lives. The trees, the plants, the food that we eat, the living soil that grows all of these things. Honoring earth and giving a little bit of honor to good old material reality. You wouldn't think material reality needs much help from us, but these days seems to require a commitment to actually live in the real world. Saying thank you, Earth. Welcome, Earth. And finally, spirit, that intangible thing that connects us all and links us all. That never gives up, no matter how much opposition it encounters, no matter how bad things get, that eternally renews hope and inspiration, comes back again and again to try to make the world more like we envision it could be and should be. Welcome, Spirit. Thank you, Spirit. All right. So we have our sacred space now. And when I think about regeneration, and I think about movements, for me, remembering our connections to the earth and having sort of having ways to honor that connection and to do that in community is part of what I feel like creates regeneration for myself and for other people. And I want to just start off by saying a little bit about kind of where the idea for this came from. Say personally, I have been an activist for pretty much my entire life. You know, I began when I was a high school student back in the 60s, and we were protesting the Vietnam War, and then we were protesting for student rights. And since then, I've been involved in feminist movements and peace movements and anti-nuclear movements, in anti-intervention, anti-racism, in just about all the progressive movements that have gone on over the past 50 years or more. And I always think about a moment in 1999 when we had blockaded the World Trade Organization in Seattle. And we'd had this tremendous blockade and actually shut it down. And I remember saying to people, I can't believe it. I've been marching for decades saying, shut it down, shut it down. This might be the first thing we actually shut down. But I ended up in jail for 5 days with a bunch of women. We were all holding solidarity, refusing to give our names until the authorities agreed that no one was going to be singled out. And at the end, when we gave our names, we were waiting to be released, and we'd made our deal. And we introduced ourselves, and I realized there were 20 women in our little cell block. And at that time, I was 48 years old. The next youngest person was my friend, who was 35. All the rest of them were 30 or under. And one of them, who was the old lady at 30, experienced activist, was saying, yes, it's a well-known fact that most activists burn out after a couple of years. And I think about that a lot. And I was able to say, well, I've been at it for decades and I haven't burned out yet. But I think it is very true that many, many activists do burn out after a very short time. And that doesn't bode well for creating a world of justice, because it takes a long time for movements to realize their goals. We need to be in it for the long haul. And for me, having a spiritual base and having a community I can connect with on more than just the intellectual level and the planning level and the action level, but also on that deeper heart level. For me, that's part of what makes a movement regenerative and resilient and what keeps me going. I'd be really interested, it's a big group here and hard to have open conversation, but be very interested to hear or find out what kind of movements you all have been involved in. And so I'm going to ask Charles to post into the chat a little link. And what we can do is something called a word cloud, where you can put in the movements you've been involved in, and then we'll see it all visually. And it's really cool. So Charles, can you do that? I see other people who were there, 99, at the WTO protest. See transition town movements. You can also put it in the chat. I see someone who was arrested for the first time this week. Good for you, blockading the Bank of America in New York with my 69-year-old friend. It's wonderful. I see New York Climate Week. Radical Fairies. And you'll see with the SoundCloud that the more people put in a certain thing, the bigger it gets. What a wonderful, and powerful group of people we are right here. And it's interesting, I see climate kind of hanging in there in the center.
Or how do we respond to the question?
In the chat, there's a link. You go to the link and then you can put into the link the movements you're involved in. Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. I'll give it another moment or two. What a beautiful picture of so many of the things that people are doing to try to make this world more just and more regenerative. Thank you all. Charles, you can take us back now. So what are some of the things that make a movement regenerative? When I was thinking about that, I do a lot of work in permaculture and a lot of teaching and training in permaculture, which is a whole system of ecological design that looks at nature to help us create regenerative systems so we can meet our own human needs and at the same time regenerate the environment around us. And that's probably the primary way I feel like I'm contributing to social justice at the moment. At least it seems to take up the primary amount of my time, along with writing and just living life, right? So when I started to think about this, I was thinking about it in terms of permaculture and movements that specifically are oriented toward regeneration. But I think regeneration is a concept that goes beyond just the things that we might do in agriculture or ranching or forestry. That when I think about regeneration, I think about movements that are centered on creating a world of greater justice, because I believe justice itself is regenerative, and that you can't actually have regeneration without having justice. In natural systems, part of what makes them regenerative and resilient is the sharing of resources and the cycling of resources. And you can't have a viable forest if one tree is sucking up, 90% of the nutrients and all the rest of the trees are half starving. So the inequality that we see in our economic systems, in our social systems, are working against regeneration. I also think that a regenerative movement needs to understand the need for ecological and environmental balance, that we can't have movements that actually meet human needs if we ignore the life support systems that sustain us. I think a regenerative movement needs to be participatory. It's more than just a top-down movement. It needs to be something that people are involved with, and it needs diversity. In ecological systems, diversity is what generates resilience. If you have a forest with multiple different species in it, and you get a disease or you get a bug, you've got the ability to respond. And even if you have one species that's badly impacted, you've got other species to fill in. If you have a tree plantation of genetically engineered pines, all the same, and you get a bug, you can wipe the whole thing out. And I think in human systems, if we can learn to really value and incorporate diversity, we make our systems more resilient. We see the world through a multiplicity of perspectives and lenses, and that makes us smarter. It makes us more able to respond more fully. And finally, I think a regenerative movement needs to be one that actually regenerates the people who are in the movement. I don't know how many of you have ever been in movement, like environmental movements, where you never actually got to go outside because you were always on the computer doing something, or movements where you were doing support for somebody and you were working 12 hours a day, or you felt like you could never take a break, and you get overwhelmed and you get depleted, and that leads to burnout. Or where you were working for the nonprofit, working for social justice and equality, and you were getting paid so little that you couldn't even afford food stamps. We get involved in these movements because we tend to be altruistic people, and it's important. I honor that urge and that instinct. But we also have to learn to do it in ways, and to realize that we also have the right to sustain ourselves and to receive back what we need for sustenance. It can be money, it's not always money, might be other things. That we do have the right to take breaks. We do have the right to do things that are going to feed our spirit and are going to nourish us. so that we can be in it for the long haul and not be one of those burned out people who lose heart and get exhausted. I'd be curious as to what things you think make for regeneration in a movement. And again, I'd encourage you to put that into the chat. I can't really talk and totally read the chat at the same time, but if I notice things, like I say, this is being recorded, and yes, you will get a link so you can watch it again afterwards. I'm seeing lovely things like joy and playfulness, gratitude, restorative justice, and conflict resolution. So many important things that are coming through all of you. I also think one of the really important things about right now, we're in this really weird and crucial time. I mean, if you think about the political moment we're in, it's so completely bizarre. It's honestly hard to fathom. I mean, I was listening to some of the news and podcasts over the last couple of days. You know, we've seen Trump now been convicted of fraud. You know, his whole myth about himself being so rich now is proven in court of law to be based on nothing but lies. And yet, he's still the forerunner for the Republican nomination. It seems impervious, his followers, to any things that would have completely destroyed any other politician in our lifetime. We are seeing a rise of right-wing authoritarianism and, old-fashioned, like, segregationist racism, Nazism, anti-Semitism, misogyny, like we thought we had done with. And I have spent a lot of time kind of pondering the question of, like, what is the appeal of all of this? How is this grabbing hold of people's imaginations? And I think that we have to look at the way movements either do or don't meet some of people's basic needs. I think movements are really effective when they meet some of our core needs. And I'm not sure that on the left and in the progressive world, we are doing as good a job of that as we need to be doing. So I'm going to share my screen a little bit and share some ideas about how do we build a movement that meets the needs for real human beings, for people as we actually are, not for people as we think they should be. And we have physical needs like for food, clothing, and shelter, but we also have a few very core emotional and social needs. We have a need to be safe and to feel safe, to feel like we belong, like we're part of something bigger than ourselves. We need to feel like we can be seen and be valued, and that we've got agency, that we can make a contribution. We make an impact on the world. We matter in some way. And we need to make sense of the world, that it means something, that it has a larger purpose, that it has some kind of underlying pattern that has meaning to us. I think in progressive movements, we're often trying to create safety But the question is, how do we frame safety? Too often we frame safety, I think, in a mode that's actually very old and that actually is very authoritarian, sort of in the model of crime and punishment. Have you ever been in a group where they start off with a safer space policy that says, if you do this, you will be thrown out. We don't want any racism, sexism, misogyny, heterosexism, transphobia, and anyone who expresses this in the wrong way is going to be ejected. And immediately when I hear that, I feel extremely unsafe. I like to think I'm like as progressive as anyone, and I've spent my whole life in these movements, and yet it's immediately, oh no, I'm going to say the wrong thing. And it's partly because the very framework itself is one of punishment. And to me, being progressive and regenerative is about a different kind of framework. What if we frame things in terms of support and solidarity instead of blame and punishment? When I start groups or classes, I'll often say to people, look, we think sexuality is a good thing. I'm a pagan. I believe it's sacred. It's a wonderful thing. And we're aware that it's a place where a lot of people have been deeply, deeply wounded and carry tremendous sensitivities. So I want to know who here is willing to support someone if there's something that happens, if you need support around some kind of issue. And generally what happens is everyone raises their hands, and you can look around and you can see who you can go to for support. And to my mind, that creates more of a sense of safety. We can never assure safety in a group, meaning that nobody is ever going to hurt your feelings. We're just human beings. We make mistakes. We mess up all of the time. But we can assure safety in the sense of this is a group where people are going to have your back. And many of the direct action groups when I've been in, when we've been holding solidarity, when we've actually been facing risks and facing dangers, even though we're facing incredible physical danger and sometimes legal dangers, that sense of being part of a group who was in it together, standing there shoulder to shoulder, that created a sense of emotional safety that was much more powerful than the dangers and the real fears that we were facing. So we can think about establishing ground rules. The framework of restorative justice I really like a lot, because the idea with there is that it's not about crime and punishment. It's about saying when something goes wrong, when somebody harms someone, it's a blow to the whole community. And so how do we bring the community together around this to try to heal this rupture and to try to find ways to make amends? We need to belong. We're social creatures. We have a deep need to belong to something. And of course, the easiest and the most destructive way to meet that need, and the way that the alt-right does it so effectively, is to say, you belong because those people don't belong. You are the ones that are worthy. Those people are the ones that are subhuman or unworthy. And I think the worst things that human beings do to one another often come out of that mindset that says some of us belong and others don't. But there are positive ways that we can create a sense of belonging. A welcoming ceremony, entrance rituals. Back in the old days when we were doing anti-nuclear work, we'd have nonviolence trainings before people would come to a blockade. And in some sense, that weekend of training became like the entrance ritual, like almost the induction into the culture and that sense of belonging to a group and to a movement. When people have to leave, we can have exit rituals and leave taking ceremonies. I remember again back in the 80s when we were blockading a nuclear plant and we were holding solidarity. We were staying there in jail and it went on for 2 weeks. And there were people who just had to leave. They had to site out and go back to work. They had kids. They just couldn't stay in that long. And what we realized is instead of trying to like shame them or blame them, we created a little exit ceremony where we had made like a tunnel of love and sang to them as they went out to say, you still belong to our movement. You're going to be holding solidarity in a different way. We want to have a movement that allows for different people's needs and abilities and ways of participating. We can have mentoring and buddies, all those things that we do to create social gatherings, fun together. If you want to create a movement and bring people in and make it more diverse, don't just go and invite people in to come to meetings, but you might try reaching out and making connections with new people by also inviting them to come to dinner or to go to a party or to, go out to lunch or whatever it is you enjoy doing, taking a walk in nature together, having some social time so you meet people on multiple levels. And then, of course, all the ways humans show they belong, the things we wear, the language we say, all those things can be markers of belonging, but they can also be markers of exclusion. So just kind of being aware of that can help us notice sometimes when, we're judging people because they don't yet know all the proper radical jargon without taking the time to learn, teach, and explain it. People need to be seen and valued. So building things into your movement that remind people that they are of value. We like to do check-ins often in our meetings where people have a time to just talk a little bit about their life and be seen as more than someone who's instrumentally taken on a certain role. Being conscious of thanking people, of appreciating, learning to do effective constructive critique and supportive questions, giving people actual help when it's needed. That might be something like just making sure everyone has a ride to and fro the gathering. Making sure people who have special needs have those needs met. And giving people a chance to really make a contribution, make an impact on the world. That's why we get involved in movements to change the world. But oftentimes, like the actual impact is so far away. We go out and we blockade a nuclear power plant like we did back in the 80s. And Reagan never turned around the next day and said, "Oh, you are all so right. I was so wrong. Like, we're going to take all these weapons and get rid of them." Like, we're now, 40, 50 years beyond that. We haven't blown up the world yet. I count that as a victory, but it's hard to feel that as a victory because the result is so far away from the action that you take. So finding some ways that people can do constructive stuff and see results. It's one reason why I love permaculture. There's so many things to do. Right? You can plant things, you can, harvest things, you can thin and limb up trees and create more resilience in case of fire. You can, there's so many actual things where you immediately see an impact. And that's necessary, I think, for our mental and emotional health. And finding different ways for people to contribute who have different skills, abilities, making sure you invite people to do the creative work, not just the drudgery, and sharing those skills, mentoring when needing it. And finally, meaning, making sense of the world. I think that's one thing, when you think of the great political movements of the past, whether that was like communism or anarchism or democracy, they had a big picture of the world. And some of them had a very comprehensive picture of the world. I think our progressive movements now often don't. And a lot of us got very disillusioned with the idea of trying to define our, our ideology, certainly back in the 60s, but we maybe have gone too far away from that and forgotten that people need to have a sense of what it all means and how it all fits together. And without that, they become very vulnerable to really awesome, really awful, right? Ideologies, conspiracy theories, all of those things are ways of making sense of a world that's enormously complex and hard for us to make sense of. So, knowing what is our vision of the world, what is our picture of the world we want to create, what are the values we stand for, and not being afraid to speak about those values, put those values out to people, make clear that those are the values we're fighting for, have a clear mission. How do we make sense of the world, and even tackling those big questions, good and evil, of death, of life, of what is the purpose of being here. I think if we can do that more, then we can call people into movements that are more resilient and more complex and less simplistic than the kinds of things people are often pulled into right now. Here we go here. Okay, so what do we need to do in movements? Movements for change have to do more than just tell people they're saying something wrong or doing something wrong. And they have to do more than just responding to stuff on the internet. We need to figure out a way to make our movements welcoming, and welcoming to people who don't already think like we do, and don't already hold our opinions, who may or may not share all of our values, but may share some core values. Because if we want to make change on a large scale, we need to build large, broad-based movements. We can't do that with tiny little movements of the pure. We have to do it with big, messy movements of people who are impure and may sometimes agree with us and sometimes not. We have to be willing to find ways to make those coalitions and to build ground where we can build ground, and understand that the way that we might change people's minds around certain things, they aren't already there, is by building relationships with them, by working together on other things. We need to educate and inform people. And, I know that we often say in movements, the oppressed people shouldn't be responsible to educate their oppressors. If you're a person of color, it gets exhausting to constantly have to educate people around racism. If you're a trans person or uh, gender, queer person, you get burned out trying to talk to people about it. And you shouldn't have to be the one to always do that work. But the movement as a whole absolutely has to do that work because that's what movements are about. And too often I see people refusing to educate. Um, I've seen people, when somebody has said something that they thought was ignorant or politically incorrect, or ask a question that they thought was a stupid question. I've actually heard people say, there is this thing, it's called the internet, go look it up. And I want to go, no, don't do that. Whatever you do, don't send people out onto the internet. Because Goddess only knows what they're going to run into. It's somebody's responsibility in the movement to say, well, here's what we think, and this is why we think it, and here's how it fits into our bigger picture of the world. I think about after when Roe versus Wade was overturned a year or so ago, people were posting all kinds of things on Facebook. And I remember someone in one of our communities, somebody I didn't know, I think was new to the community, had posted something on Facebook that said, I'm with her. And, it was meant as support for women and for people who can get pregnant. And the response they got from someone who I think should have known better immediately was, well, it's not just women who can get pregnant. And, you're ignoring all of the trans people who might identify as male but be capable of getting pregnant as well. And the person responded in some way, and the next thing they were being called transphobic. And I'm like, hello, everybody. Could we take a step back here and say, maybe assuming that what you want to do is educate this person, not prove how much righter you are than them, could you not have said, hey, thank you, for your support and solidarity for women right now? It's really crucial. We need that. Welcome to the movement. And let's just keep in mind that there may be people who don't identify as women that are still capable of getting pregnant. And let's also make sure we're defending their rights as well. Movements need to alarm people. They need to create a sense of urgency. I know lots of people are involved in the climate movement, and the climate movement, often in the climate movement, we're like, why aren't people more alarmed about this? We need people to actually get how urgent this is. But we can't just alarm people. We also need to inspire people and offer hope. Because if we just alarm people, then people get discouraged, get despondent, and become apathetic. So I often say we're really good on the left by sort of telling this narrative that basically says to people, hey, things are worse than you thought. And it's probably your fault. And what we should be telling people is, hey, things are worse than we thought, but they could be better than we ever imagined, and you have a crucial role to play in making that happen. So let's work together, and we can turn this around. And to do that, we need to have a big picture. We need to have more than just this local issue, this immediate issue. We need to understand how the issues fit together and be able to offer, again, that sense of meaning to people and connection to people. But we also need to have a plan of action. So we can't just complain, right? We need to have some thing to present to people to say, here's the mess we're in. This is how we get out of it. This is how we organize our way out of it. So I'm going to stop sharing right now. And again, I'm going to take a minute here just to glance over some of the chat and just say if you have a response right now, we're almost at the end of our hour, but I'd love to encourage you to put that into the chat. Yeah. And I want to just say that, again, just having you all together and just seeing the immense range of things that people are working on is part of what gives me hope right now. And I do truly believe that as challenging as this moment is, it's also a tremendous opportunity for building a movement that is strong and vibrant and building it that can counter this wave of right-wing, alt-right, whatever that we're experiencing. You know, in some sense, that move to the right is pulling on people's sense of dissatisfaction with what is. I think if we can offer people, again, a more hopeful vision of what could be, a more just vision, a more resilient vision, and a plan for getting there, we can start to build a counterforce that can be truly, truly effective in bringing us into a world of greater justice and balance. I'll also say that, again, as discouraging as things are in many, many ways, I've also seen some tremendous gains this year. You know, we have actually passed laws and put money into doing something about climate change at a level that is greater than we've ever done before, in spite of this almost impossible political morass that we're in. We see progressive people getting elected to office. We see young people being motivated to get involved and to take action. I see my neighbors out on the land getting together to do things to make our roads and our forests safer and more resilient to fire, and working to protect our communities. We see a movement for land back for Indigenous people to actually help support getting back more land. You know, there's so many incredible things that are happening right now. And I hope we can all kind of focus on that as well and not let ourselves get ground down by the negativity, but continue to do the work we're doing and do it with heart and with soul and with spirit, and change the world. Earth Activist Training is our organization that teaches permaculture design with a grounding in spirit and a focus on organizing and activism. We have supported many, many different communities over the last 20 or so years that we've been together. We offer diversity scholarships for people of color and Indigenous folks, and have worked with a number of different communities around the world to help share some of these skills and tools of resilient land management. We have courses in permaculture design. We'll have an in-person permaculture design course in California next January, and we have online courses that people can take wherever you are in the world. I know Charles is putting some of the stuff in the chat, but I do have a class coming up starting in October on empowering collaborative groups that will take some of this material and some of the material in my book, The Empowerment Manual, and over 6 weeks really work with how do we build groups that can be effective and that can be nurturing and empowering places for people to be and to work together. I'll also say that next week there's an in-person permaculture convergence in Oregon in Cottage Grove, and I'll be giving a talk there on building resilient movements and a workshop. And it's an exciting chance for people in the permaculture world. Finally, we're starting to get back together in person after all the COVID years. So if you have a chance to join us, the link is also in the chat. And I want to say some big thank yous. Thank you to all of you for joining, and thank you for all of the work that you do. Again, it's just really heartening for me that we got so much response to this, and that just seeing all of the different movements and the things that you're involved in makes me feel like the world is in good hands. I want to thank Dionysus for the beautiful interpretation. I want to thank Charles for doing the tech for this, and just so much of what you do, Charles. Like, we couldn't have Earth Activist Training without you. And our whole EAT team for helping to do all the behind the scenes things that need to be done, even to put out a little meeting like this. Thank you all. I'll also say if you are interested in empowering collaborative groups and you've been to this webinar, we have a special discount for you that's there. And Charles, I think, has put the code in the chat. If you link and you register with that code, you get, I think it's a, what, 15% discount.
15% off using
15%
code ECG. That's Power and Collaborative Groups 2023. So ECG 23 for 15% off that class with Starhawk, Power and Collaborative Group.
Right. Thank you. And I want to say thank you to Spirit and to Earth and Water and Fire and Air and those wonderful elements that sustain our lives. And I encourage you to take some time in the next few days and weeks, if you can get outside and just spend some time to connect with the elements and breathe them in and take them in and let them renew your spirit and your energy. And make sure in all those Zoom meetings and all those computer things and all those marches and all those things that you do, that you also take some time to renew yourself. I think we've got some music to play ourselves out with. So, again, thank you all.